removed from the world of everyday family concerns and encouraged to live close to nature. Although the learning of Sanskrit grammar and scriptures was by rote, their interpretation included a method of questioning, of critical inquiry, and stress was placed on character formation through experience as well as on intellectual knowledge. The products of this system of education were ready to contribute to the welfare of society. Although only a minority followed the Gurukula route in its classical form, sometimes the students would live at home and attend the teacher on a daily basis. The convention of a teacher only taking a few students and living apart was not always followed in the big university towns such as Takshila. With the emergence of Buddhism, monasteries became centres of learning, and its development was emulated in the Hindu map system. The Gurukula system served as an ideal and was admired by Vivekananda, who saw the emphasis on the teacher being responsible for the pupils' spiritual, moral, and intellectual development as something to be emulated in the schools of the Ramakrishna mission. The constitution of the Ramakrishna mission highlights the importance of education in the first item in its methods of action. To train men so as to make them competent to teach such knowledge or science as are conducive to the material and spiritual welfare of the masses. Nevertheless, the Ramakrishna mission made little progress in establishing schools until the first residential high school was established in Deogar in 1922 in response to Gandhi's call for a national education programme. In Vivekananda's lifetime, a school for girls was started in Kolkata by Sister Nivedita, a Western disciple who had been a teacher in England and was a follower of the educational theory of Froebel and Pestalozzi. Nivedita saw the school as the beginning of a radical programme of national education, but became increasingly frustrated by British policy. She objected strongly to Curzon's Universities Commission of 1902 and the subsequent act bringing universities directly under the control of the government. She saw this as an attack on the right of India to be India, the right of India to think for herself, the right of India to knowledge. Her political activities were in the end to lead to Sister Nivedita leaving the Ramakrishna mission, although she remained on good terms with its members. Swami Akarnananda, who was always active in social work, persuaded the Raja of Khetri to admit boys from the lower castes into the high school in his state, and also started a school at Nathdwara. The Raja of Kashmir offered him funds for a school, but the British resident would not grant permission for it to be opened, and other small-scale projects met with resistance from the government administration. Even someone as wealthy as the industrialist Tata was to have a long struggle with the British before he could establish his research institute for science. Tata had met Vivekananda during the sea voyage to Chicago, where he attended the trade section of the World Fair in 1892. He refers to this meeting in a letter he wrote to Vivekananda in 1898. I very much recall at this moment your views on the growth of the ascetic spirit in India and the duty not of destroying but of diverting it into useful channels. I recall these ideas in connection with my scheme of a research institute of science, of which you have doubtless heard or read. It seems to me that no better use can be made of the ascetic spirit than the establishment of monasteries or residential halls for men dominated by this spirit, where they should live with ordinary decency and devote their lives to the cultivation of sciences, natural and humanistic. I am of the opinion that if such a crusade in favour of asceticism of this kind were undertaken by a competent leader, it would greatly help India, science and the good name of our common country. I know not who would make a more fitting general of such a campaign than Vivekananda. By 1898, Vivekananda's health was deteriorating and he was exhausted after his lecture tour of India. We have no record of any response to this letter from Vivekananda, and it's not clear from the letter whether it was an invitation to lead the initiative or simply as an endorsement of his educational ideas. Vivekananda's views on the education policy for India were not unique. The epigram Science and Sanskrit, first used by Dayananda Saraswati. In 1884, the Dayanand Anglo-Vedic College was founded in Lahore with a mission to provide a genuinely national education where modern science and English could be taught without untethering educated Indians from their religious and cultural moorings. In the Brahmo Samaj, a distinct education policy had emerged during the leadership of Keshav Chandra Sen, and in the early 1870s, 2 schools were founded in Calcutta. Interest in education was commensurate with the increased awareness of social issues and the need for reform at this time. In a lecture called Philosophy and Madness in Religion, published in 1877, Keshav Chandra Sen explores how the benefits of education can be brought to the masses. Let me have only 50 young men from our universities, trained in science and philosophy and baptized with the spirit of madness, and let these men go forth as missionary soldiers of God, conquering and to conquer, and in the fullness of time the banners of truth shall be planted the length and breadth of the country. The Brahmo Samaj was influential in Calcutta, and the parallels here with Vivekananda's model of science and Sanskrit are striking. The activities of the Arya Samaj were also well known to Vivekananda, and his lectures in Lahore in 1897 make particular reference to the need for a national model of education. Another source of influence on Vivekananda's view on education was his own experience of attending schools founded by Scottish missionaries, in which the combination of spiritual formation and modern knowledge were seen to be compatible. It is also during his time at Presidency College that he is likely to have encountered positivism, as interpreted by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, in what has been called the positivist reform of India. We know that Vivekananda was interested in the work of the positivist Herbert Spencer, and that he translated the book Education, Intellectual, Moral and Spiritual into Bengali. During his visit to Chicago in 1892, Vivekananda also came into contact with the American philosophers. In a recent book, the educational philosophies of Vivekananda and Dewey have been compared. William James, a principal figure in the development of the American philosophy of pragmatism, records meeting Vivekananda, and it uses Vivekananda as one of the case studies of religious experience in a famous lecture he gave in 1901. It was another member of this circle, John Dewey, who had developed an approach to education that was tested and refined in the laboratory school he established during his time at the University of Chicago. Whilst there is no record of a meeting with Dewey, we do know that Vivekananda met one of the collaborators in the American laboratory school project, Jane Addams. The laboratory school was founded on the principle that education should be about intelligent living and should focus on accessing and testing concepts through practical activity. The ethos of the school was to challenge divisions between theory and practice, academic and vocational education, in order to equip young people to become self-reliant and creative as they made sense of a changing world. Teachers and pupils worked together in a process of mutual discovery that embodied the idea of a community of inquiry, as envisaged by another American philosopher, Charles Peirce. These sentiments resonate with the ideas expressed in Vivekananda's approach to education. Although Dewey's philosophy places less emphasis on the value of tradition than did Vivekananda, the connection with Jane Addams meant that the school valued the traditional craft skills of the various communities in Chicago. Vivekananda saw education as the key to India's national development, and he shared this view with many of his contemporaries. As we have seen, his ideas were not original, but establishing patterns of influence is difficult. It is not necessary always to trace modern ideas to Western sources, as Vivekananda's experience shows us. He lived in a society marked to a high level by cross-fertilization of ideas and interests from Britain, America, and all over India. Vivekananda was adept at identifying opportunities to make productive links between different sources of influence, regardless of from where they came. And with his contemporaries, he was engaged in finding a viable response to the challenges of modernity. It is the spirit of inquiry, characterized by a willingness to engage with ideas, whatever their source, without losing a sense of being grounded in one's own tradition, that is still relevant to us today. Vivekananda's approach to education, as summarized in the epigram Science and Sanskrit, is important today in two respects: for the processes through which the ideas were formulated and for the content of the ideas themselves. If we begin with the process. Science and Sanskrit as an approach to education originated in the rich culture of late 19th century Bengal, in which the cross-fertilization of ideas from numerous sources was fostered by the intellectual atmosphere of movements such as the Brahmo Samaj. Members of the Bengali elite were beneficiaries of a history of interaction with the West through scholars attracted to Indian culture such as James Prinsep, and latterly through attendance at schools in which the curriculum was modelled on the British education system, but where teachers also had a genuine interest in Indian culture. Vivekananda's generation of educated Bengalis were sufficiently confident in their Indian identity to seek new experiences, and they regarded Westerners as their equals. Vivekananda continued in the tradition of being open and curious to learn from whatever sources were open to him, and to accommodate new ideas into his understanding of the world. He was aware of differences and experienced the discrimination that so often accompanied them, but he could see possibilities as well, and he wanted to develop an exchange of ideas to the ultimate benefit of India. It has been pointed out that the full import of Vivekananda's approach has sometimes been diluted by the overuse of the phrase unity in diversity, which, if we're not careful, can smooth over differences. If we are to meet the challenges of globalization and retain its benefits, then we should look once more at the processes by which Vivekananda developed his ideas. With regard to the content of the programme of education represented by the epigram Science and Sanskrit, we find many suggestions that are current in contemporary educational debate. Vivekananda emphasised that the purpose of education is to achieve self-realisation and to unlock the potential of the learner. He also stressed that individual advancement was to be achieved in and through interactions with others in a process of mutual, collaborative inquiry. He emphasised the importance of exchanges between people, between countries and across the world. With regard to the role of the teacher, he focused on the importance of building positive relationships with learners, in which the capacity to model the intellectual and emotional processes expected of the learner was exemplified by the teacher. The teacher should be engaged in inquiry as partners in learning with their students and should share the excitement of education. They should show how to be open to new ideas, to respond to influences, and to maintain a strong personal identity. Experience is an important aspect of learning, and Vivekananda challenged the division between the academic, the intellectual, and the practical vocational education. Teachers should have moral integrity and be always conscious of the privilege of being able to influence young minds. Finally, the acknowledgement of individual identity and the social cultural context of education are crucial to effective learning. The vision for education that Vivekananda outlined in his speeches still has appeal for us as educators today, and the need to build bridges between science and the humanities, the theoretical and the practical, tradition and innovation remains just as urgent today as it was in the 19th century. Thank you.